Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Memorial Day and welcome to summer. It feels like summer today here at the Morris Arboretum. I'm Bill Cullina, the Executive Director, and I thought I'd take you on a tour today of some of the lovely flowering trees and shrubs in our collection that hail from the Mid-Atlantic and the southeastern part of the United States. So come on along and we'll see what we can find. In front of me here, over on the Bloomfield farm side, is this spectacular flowering tree. This is painted buckeye, Aeschylus ex neglecta. It's a hybrid between two native southeastern species. The yellow buckeye, which is a big tree with sort of yellowish flowers, and the Aeschylus sylvatica, which is a two-toned flowered sort of pink and peachy colors and more of a shrub to small tree. So here you get the tree size of the yellow buckeye and the beautiful flowers of the shrubbier parent. Now we'll go take a close-up look at this. Just beautiful flowers. Not too much of a scent, but that's what you have. Doesn't seem to set a lot of seed. Not surprising, being a hybrid. It does set some fruit. But all in all, a great tree if you've got space for it to grow. Now we looked at the painted buckeye, which is a big tree. Here we've got the red buckeye, really more sort of a pinkish red color. That hails from the southeast all the way west of Texas. And unlike the first one, this is actually a small tree, a beautiful sort of smaller landscape specimen, a plant I think is just underappreciated, underutilized. It's a little bit going by and it's flowering. Right now you can see some of the buckeyes starting to form there, but pretty adaptable as far as conditions, can take drought and heat very well. This is Aeschylus pavia, the red buckeye. Well, when I said we would look at trees and shrubs native to the southeast, I should have mentioned vines too. I saw this lovely Wisteria frutescens amethyst falls blooming on our entrance gates and had to stop and photograph this. The native wisteria, American wisteria, if you're familiar with Chinese wisteria, it is a beautiful plant and flower with long racemes of flowers, but it can be aggressive, if maybe downright invasive, coming up from the roots and spreading and taking down structures and everything. The American wisteria is a much more demure plant. I've had this growing on pergolas and trellises for a decade or more without any issue at all. It doesn't have quite the long dramatic inflorescences, but beautiful in its own way. There's another species related to this, Wisteria macrostachys, which is also a southeastern species that has a little bit longer inflorescences if you're looking for that substitute. And the second native vine that's growing right nearby is the trumpet honeysuckle, Lonicera sempervirens, which just means evergreen, fancy word for evergreen. It's sort of semi-evergreen, but I prefer to call this the hummingbird feeder that never needs cleaning, because it's just incredible watching the hummingbirds on these plants. And there are certain cultivars, this is not a named cultivar, but there's some, Alabama Crimson is one that I like, that if they're growing in full sun and getting good water and nutrients, they'll bloom basically nonstop all summer, and the hummingbirds will just flock to them. They don't have the fragrance that some of the other night blooming moth pollinated honeysuckles have, but it's just a beautiful color, and it's fun to see our little winged friends enjoying them too. I've moved up the Magnolia Slope up near our Widener Center and stopped now to look at this beautiful specimen of fringe tree, Cheonanthus virginicus. This is a male plant. You wouldn't know by just looking at it, but I can tell by looking at the flowers closely. But I think this is really just has a great shape and typical sort of multi-stemmed small tree, large shrub, really adaptable plant. Just can't get enough of this species. Morris Arboretum has an extensive collection of native azaleas. These are species that are native from Atlantic Canada all the way down through the southeast and central south. There are many different species. We're looking at the Piedmont azalea that's centered around the Carolinas right now. Beautiful long pink tube here with the petals and these the anthers and the stigma sticking out very distinctively like that. So designed for both hummingbirds and bees to pollinate. But this is just one of the many species. It's sort of half going by. All the native azaleas are deciduous species, so they'll lose their leaves in the wintertime. But if you plant a number of different ones, you can have them in flower from late spring all the way through into the heart of summertime. They also hybridize very easily too. So we'll look at one of the hybrids between this. Notice the pink and the white, and a hybrid with another species called Florida azalea, Rhododendron ostrinum, that is a different color. So we'll look at that one next, and then look at the hybrid. Rhododendron ostrinum, you can definitely see the family resemblance with the Piedmont azalea. Just obviously the shape of the flower is very similar, but the color is strikingly different. This is the Florida azalea. It's a little less winter hardy than some of the others, but certainly here in the Philadelphia area does beautifully, loves the summer heat. And here we have it growing with most of our collection in dappled shade, very light shade, and decently moist soils down along the stream. Now I think you can see when you look at the Piedmont azalea and you look at the Florida azalea and you think about those characteristics and you sort of mash them together in a plant, this is not that surprising. You get something like this. This is a hybrid between the two. So it has this sort of peachy color, but with the dark pink tube of the Piedmont azalea and that sort of yellowish color from the Florida azalea. So just a lovely plant all in all, one of the hybrids that we have here in the collection. And this is just produced by basically taking pollen from one and crossing it with the other one and growing up the progeny. Rhododendron viscosum, the swamp or sticky bud azalea, is also really fragrant. Most of these azaleas have wonderful fragrances. This one, people talk about it being clove-like. To me, it smells very much like the Easter lilies that we would get when I was a kid. Very beautiful, rich, hearty perfume. This flower shape on here is a little bit different than some of the others we were looking at. And it's called sticky bud because there are glands on the base of the flower there that are sort of sticky, that probably are a deterrent, pest deterrent. They probably contain something that that the insect wouldn't like to eat. This is a species that will grow in pretty wet soils, although it doesn't have to grow in wet soils. But you'll often find this in swamps and the edge of ponds and things like that. I had to pause on our azalea walk to just talk for a second about this palm. Now, you wouldn't expect a palm tree to be growing at the Morris Arboretum in Philadelphia, but this is a needle palm, I can't even say it, Raphidiophyllum hystrix, native to the southeast, and this is considered probably the hardiest palm in the world. It doesn't get a trunk the way that you think of sort of a palm tree growing. This is a fairly decent sized specimen, although it can get probably twice as big as this. It's been growing here since the 90s, so very winter hardy. It tends to put up suckers at the base, and so there's many stems inside of there. And it's already started to grow again for the year. It's called needle palm because it has long spines down along the base of the trunk, around the leaf bases, which probably was there to deter predators in some distant past. This is a species that is not closely related to any North American palms. Its closest relative is the windmill palm from China, and it's thought that back many years, millions of years ago, when the sort of supercontinent of Laurasia was all one, that this plant was much more widespread. And in fact, there's fossil records found up into Canada of this palm, so it tells you that the climate was a little bit warmer back then. But I wrote about this species in our upcoming season's newsletter, which will be coming out very soon. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. But needle palm, a palm that you can grow and fill up. So the next stop on our azalea tour is Rhododendron atlanticum, the coast azalea. You might guess from that name that it is native from the Atlantic coast of the southeast. It grows from about the Delmarva down south, and it has the same sort of clovey Easter lily smell that the sticky bud or the swamp azalea has. In fact, they're fairly closely related. If you look at the details of the flower, they look very similar. The main difference here is that the plant is much more compact. These are old plants, and they really only stand about 3.5 feet tall. So I like this species if for places where I'm looking for an azalea that doesn't get quite as large. You may not be able to see here, but we'll go look a little closer too, that the foliage has a beautiful bluish color to it too. Well, the flowers are going by a little bit on the coast azalea, but hopefully you can see some of that detail of the foliage itself. Now, I'm going to pan over here and look at what's underneath this azalea. You can see here that we've got pine needles scattered around here. These are actually longleaf pine needles that we buy in, pine straw as you might call it down south. We buy these and spread them underneath the azaleas in this area, and we do that purposely. It's one of the only places in the Arboretum where we use pine straw, but that's to help build the right sort of soil that the azaleas really like. They like acidic soil with sort of slow decaying organic material in there, and it really provides a great substrate for them over time. These needles break down very slowly, and then eventually become almost like a peat. And the rhododendrons and azaleas love to root through this very shallowly. If you've transplanted azaleas, you know that they are not always the easiest things to transplant. They can sort of sulk for a few years after you put them in. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're very fine rooted, very shallow rooted, and want to be in this kind of organic soil that you can create with pine needles. You can use wood chips and that sort of thing. They establish much more quickly that way. Well, this is perhaps maybe my favorite native azalea. I don't know, the color is just so striking on this particular plant, and the flowers are large. It's got a nice compact habit. This is a cultivar of the flame azalea, Rhododendron calendulaceum, and it's a cultivar called Smoky Mountaineer. You might guess where it's from. And I originally saw this at the Arnold Arboretum, and they have some beautiful plants of this. It's very proliferous. It blooms every year. It has a nice tight habit like this. The other interesting thing, and hopefully you can see these capsules here, it produces a lot of seed. I've grown more native azaleas from seed than I can count, but often it's difficult to get viable seed if you're just going out in the fall and collecting them. These capsules will form during the summertime, and then usually around the first frost, so into October, maybe early November, they start to crack open like this, and then you can just shake the fine seed out like that. But this particular cultivar produces lots and lots of viable seed. There's some speculation that this is potentially a hybrid, a natural hybrid, although without doing the genetic work on that, there's really no way to tell. But this is Smoky Mountaineer flame azalea. Styrax is a family or a genus rather, that's represented in both the New World and the Old World in Asia and North America. We're looking at the Japanese snowbell, Styrax japonicus, pretty familiar garden plant, and in full bloom now. But I want to show you one of the southeastern Styrax that resembles it in some ways. This is what the flowers of the Japanese look like, and now we'll look at the big leaf. All right, well, this is another southeastern species, the big leaf Styrax, Styrax grandifolius. Now you look at those leaves and you think, they don't look very big to me. Well, they will get larger after it flowers. It continues to grow, and leaves get larger and larger through the season as they emerge. But you can see that there's quite the family resemblance. They look a little bit like a tomato flower or something like that with that kind of beak. And in this case, the flower, the petals reflect so as they sort of curve back, which gives it a kind of a different look. It's just an all in all more delicate tree, I think, than the Japanese snowbell. And it likes kind of rich soils and good garden conditions, but I think it's really an underutilized native species. It will sometimes sprout up from the roots that you can just prune off if it's growing somewhere where you don't want it to grow. But here we've got it pruned into a nice tree shape, which I'll show you next. Sorry if you hear any background noise, but the guys are finishing up our rose garden expansion and laying the sod right now, so they're frantically trying to get that done today. That's looking beautiful. But here in front of us is a plant that you might walk by and not even know it's in flower unless you really look carefully. You might smell it rather than see it. This is a selection of Carolina allspice or sweet shrub, Calycanthus floridus, which is another southeastern native. And what's interesting is that I'll hold up more of the typical, here's the typical flower color, this sort of burgundy color. And then the Athens next door. Now, this was just basically a plant that came up and didn't have much pigmentation in its flowers. It really just has the chlorophyll in there. The reason you would grow this is not for the look of the flowers, but it's the fragrance. This is a ancient lineage of plants. The Calycanthus are some of the early flowering plants descended from them. In fact, there's a plant that grows in the rainforests of Australia that is considered, one of the earliest flowering plants still in existence. And it back when these evolved, there weren't as many pollinators, and so they rely on beetles for the most part for pollination. And beetles, one of the scents that they're attracted to is fruit. So Calycanthus athens has the most amazing pineapple, mango, tropical fruit salad fragrance. And it is really floriferous when it gets a little bit of sun, and it just fills the air with that perfume. Now, I've grown and tried a lot of Calycanthus cultivars, and there are very few that have that really strong fragrance. This red one is just a seedling. It doesn't hardly smell at all. There is a red cultivar called Michael Lindsay, which is very fragrant, which I like a lot if you want more of that red color. But this is Calycanthus floridus, here growing in the shade. I'll show you what it looks like. I have a azalea-like form. It's a multi-stemmed shrub with new sprouts coming out from the base. If I can zoom in on that one there, with the flowers coming out, you can see that the sprouts coming out from the base have more flowers. This is a plant that I like to basically renew by pruning back the old stems every 5 years or so to get that flush of new growth from the base, because it tends to flower a lot more vigorously that way. Here we have another ancient plant, or ancient line of plants, Alyssum floridanum, the Florida anise. Like the Calycanthus, these flowers have been around a long time. This family is one of the ancient lines, and similar red colors, and even the shape looks a little bit similar too, although they're not that closely related. This is an evergreen, but it's going through its sort of awkward stage now where the old leaves that made it through the winter are dying and the new growth is coming out. But beautiful in flower. This is a plant that's only been in a couple of years, so it's just getting established. But it's a southeastern species that I think is proving to be pretty hardy in Zone 7, northern Zone 7, even warmer parts of Zone 6. And it's very shade tolerant. In fact, it really likes being in the shade. We've got it in partial shade under evergreens here. So if you're looking for an evergreen that can tolerate a lot of shade, see if you can find Florida anise. Now, one thing I'll say is, unfortunately, the smell of this isn't as luscious as the Calycanthus. This may be fly pollinated, not beetle pollinated, because it doesn't smell like carrion, but it has a sort of unpleasant chemically smell that you wouldn't want to have on your dinner plate. I came over to show you pawpaws, but I had to stop at Patrick Doherty's loop-to-loop just to show you. It's looking a little shaggy, like my hair, coming out with all those willow sprouts. What's really interesting about this is that this is the third Patrick Doherty sculpture that we've installed, but this is the first time we used live willow that hadn't dried out at all. And if you have ever tried this, it works very easily. You can just take willow branches in late winter, cut lengths maybe 2 or 3 feet long, or you can do longer, and just stick the end into the ground and they will root and grow into a new tree. So of course we stuck the bases of these willow branches into the ground, and now they've rooted and formed a new tree. So only maybe 10 or 15% of these stems actually took root. The rest of them are slowly decaying. Patrick Doherty sculptures are intended to be temporary installations, and after 2 years or so they start to fall down. But we're really wondering what is going to happen with this one, because if there are enough live stems there, then perhaps it will keep this up. So this is sort of a living art experiment. We'll see what happens to loop over the next year or two. I'm down in the pawpaw patch looking at pawpaws. Pawpaw is in another one of the ancient flowering plant families, the Andanaceae. Most of the representatives of that family are tropical. You might have had cherimoya fruits in the supermarket, delicious tropical fruit. But other than this species and potentially a sort of a dwarf form of this, all the other pawpaws in the U.S. really grow just down in Florida. There's some really interesting magnolia-like flowered pawpaws that grow down in sort of the Orlando area and south. But this species is perfectly hardy, grows all the way up through the Midwest. It's a suckering small tree, so it likes to come up from root sprouts and form thickets. This kind of conditions of damp soil down along streams is perfect for it. This produces the largest edible fruit of any of the eastern native species. It's pretty good tasting fruit, I would have to say. They don't ship well, they don't store well, so it's the kind of thing that you have to have your own pawpaw patch to, or have somebody down the street or a local farmer that is growing these, so you can enjoy pawpaws in the fall. Now, this is not a dioecious species like the fringe tree. It doesn't have male plants and female plants, but if you watch my pollination video, I talk about self-incompatibility, and it's true with pawpaws that they don't tend to like to pollinate themselves. So if you're going to grow pawpaws for fruit, just think about maybe getting several plants, non-genetically related individuals, so that you can enjoy the fruits in the fall. The final tree on my tour today is another one of my favorites. This is Sweet Bay Magnolia, Magnolia virginiana, which is native all the way from Florida up the coast to Massachusetts and then west. It's a small magnolia, semi-evergreen magnolia. This is a young one just starting to flower here. It's maybe its first year blooming, but it's gone from relative obscurity to becoming a popular landscape plant in the last 10 or 15 years because it's so adaptable. And as I sort of pan over to another small one here, it has the advantage of being a narrow plant, a good plant for landscapes, for tighter situations. And it also doesn't cast as heavy a shade when it's mature as the southern magnolia. The way the leaves are arranged and the way they branch is more of an open arrangement. But beautiful fragrance here too. I can probably describe it as grandmother's perfume, I think. It's you probably would feel the same way. But the nice thing about the Sweet Bay Magnolia is you can see some more buds coming up in there. They flower sequentially so that you don't get one big flush of blooms like the early magnolias. You'll get a flower popping open and then another one and another one. So you can enjoy a few of those blooms over the course of about 3 or 4 weeks. I hope you've enjoyed the video today. We hope that we can welcome you here again very soon in person, but until then, I hope you're well, and I hope you get a chance to get outside and enjoy some nature of your own.